Welcome to the podcast, Your Future in Sales and Marketing, the podcast that helps you make great career decisions. My name is Mike Dixon, and I'm a professional sales and marketing recruiter. I love what I do, but my biggest frustration is seeing too many people not realizing their career potential. In this podcast, I'll introduce you to my network, an amazing group of business leaders from the biggest tier 1 organizations through to some super fast growth SMEs. They'll share their career journeys and give unique advice and insights on managing your career and leading a function and a business. Join me, Mike Dixon of AXR Recruitment and Search, to help guide your future in sales and marketing. Well, hello and welcome to the podcast, Your Future in Sales and Marketing, with me, Mike Dixon, Director of AXR Recruitment and Search. Our purpose at AXR is to help you make great career decisions. And in the podcast today, we have another female star of the sales leadership world who will share her journey and give you some career insights you just cannot get anywhere else. Welcome to the pod, Katie Steele. How are you?
Thanks, Mike. Great to be here today. Fantastic
to have you. Really looking forward to getting to your career journey. Lots to talk about as always. And talking of, as always, we start typically with the same questions. I'm picking this, or gathering this incredible portfolio of brands that people love. So what's your favorite brand? And you can't pick a brand you've worked on.
So this is going to be really controversial, but I'm actually not massively brand loyal. If you'd asked me 10 years ago, I would have had a handful of brands that I could have just spieled off. They've kind of moved as I've grown up. So, for example, the move from Moët to Verve is a classic. That said, I love what Dove have done for beauty beyond the traditional product that it actually is. And if you haven't seen their latest campaign, which is all around taking head on how toxic social media can be for young girls, you just got to watch it. It's amazing.
I kind of do love the way Dove have taken what was a mainstream brand and really moved away from what's been mainstream brand positioning and advertising. I think it's really powerful. I completely agree. Good choice. Good choice. Okay, so let's before we jump into your career, Katie, a bit about you before work. So where did you grow up? Where are you from?
So I don't know if you can tell from the accent, but I'm originally from the north of England, grew up in this beautiful place called the Lake District. You definitely don't appreciate it when you're growing up there as a teen because it's pretty quiet. I then went to university in Leeds and studied business studies, and that's where I started my career. And 11 years ago, made the big decision to move over the ditch. So I've had 7 years in Sydney and 2 in Melbourne. So really shaking it up within Australia as well.
Right, but humble beginnings in the Lake District.
Definitely.
It's funny, I grew up on the Scottish borders, and like you, when I go back there now, it's like, oh, it's such a beautiful place. But at the time, all you want to do is get out and do something else. Excellent. Right, let's get into it. So we've interviewed, I reckon, over 35 sales directors so far in the pod, and only a few have started their career in retail. Now, you spent 5 years at Asda in the UK. Was that a kind of carefully considered decision in terms of how you wanted to start your career, or just where you happened to land?
Really good question. So the beginning was when I was doing my uni degree, and part of that we had to do a 12-month placement in industry. And at the time, retail had a really good reputation for doing really good placement schemes. So they rotated you every couple of months. I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do when I left uni. So on that basis, I decided to join the scheme, which gave me so much visibility around roles that you've never even heard of when you're at university.
And Asda, for those who don't know Asda?
So it's kind of fought between the number 2 and the number 3 spot in the UK retail landscape. There's about 7 major retailers over there at the moment. At the time when I was there, it was owned by Walmart, which hopefully many of you have heard is one of the biggest retailers in the States. The other thing to note is the main difference between UK retail and the likes of Woolies and Coles over here is outside of grocery, we also sell liquor, we sell general merchandise, clothes. So it's a much broader range versus retail in Australia.
It is interesting as a Brit when you first come to Australia, and I was in New Zealand first, but Australia's, I think it's unique. The first thing you look around, a supermarket in Coles or Woolies is, so where's the liquor? And,
You've got to work extra hard to get your bottle of wine or your bottle of spirits. Yeah.
Your first couple of weeks, you're like, where did I go? But then you
Agreed.
realise actually the liquor retailers here are very, very good. Cool. Now, we recently explored the move from retailer to supplier with Chris Walker, who's the sales director at Hasbro. I want to talk about how was it for you and how it happened, because you also managed to make that move at the same time. You moved 18,000 kilometres from Britain to Australia, which feels like a lot of change, a lot of challenge. How did it happen?
Absolutely. So first, I haven't met anyone that found the move from the UK to Sydney a challenge. And it was also a short-term move, or so I thought at the time, 11 years later, and I'm still here. The move from retail to supplier was actually a bit tougher, to be honest. So when you sat in the UK and you're looking at what you're going to do when you do move over to Australia, it made sense for me to move to Woolworths, given that I was moving to Sydney. That said, I'd moved to a brand new country. I was in a brand new city, and I still remember the hour-long bus trip from Wynyard up to Bella Vista as I was looking to do final stage interviews with Woolworths at the time. Plus, it was 35-degree heat. So by the time I was actually sat doing that final stage interview, I'd started to second-guess myself on whether or not that was the right choice. What it did do, though, is give me greater insight into the landscape over here, and it was really obvious that there was a big balance of power shift. Retailers at the time had far more power than suppliers, so I wanted to just see what it was like to be on the other side.
Right. And did you have, I guess, preconceptions on what that would be like? Versus the reality of what you found?
Yeah, and I share the similar sentiment that Chris did on the podcast, which is you have a perception that a supplier visits a retailer once or twice a month and that's all they do. When you actually go through those doors and you see how much more there is to it, it's a hugely exciting place to be part of.
Yeah, great. So you landed at Diageo, which was, a great place to kind of get to on supplier side. You were there for 4 years. Was the learning curve different than it might have been if you stayed in retail?
Definitely. I mean, Diageo for me was the perfect choice. At the time, it was going through massive transformational change. The brand portfolio is second to none when you're looking at liquor brands. Plus, I got to work with the smartest people in the industry. Not to mention, when you've moved to a brand new city, the social connectivity given the industry was pretty awesome. In terms of what I learned from Diageo versus retail, it was very much around strategic business planning, first and foremost. I'd also say the frameworks and the processes that you were given enabled you to take a much more considered approach around how you go to market, how you build teams, how you really start to build more strategic choices in terms of what you're looking to do. The biggest thing, though, that I learned from Diageo, and I have my leaders to thank for this, is the actual journey that I went on as a leader myself. They really took pride in building capability around being a great manager and also reaching your full potential as a leader as well.
I'm really struck, Katie, by the next move. It seems challenging. Back to retail, which is a lot of people once they make the move, they kind of stick, but you've gone back and into what I think is the very male world of beer. To be head of merch for beer with Dan Murphy's, it was my kind of, is that a misconception, in terms of the challenge, the beer being a male world, or is that what you walked into?
It's not a misconception. It certainly wasn't 6 years ago. When I walked through the building, I was the only female senior leader within the whole merch team. And I think that on that basis, the only females in the business at the time within the merch team were very much at an exec level, and they'd been there for many, many years. So no, Mike, it wasn't a misconception that it was a very male-dominated world.
How were you received?
Honestly, I think externally, I was really surprised with how quickly suppliers moved to put really strong female leaders onto the account to work with Dan's and the broader Endeavour group as well with BWS. That was really, really good to see, and it meant that I think we could make some really big changes in a short space of time. Internally at Dan Murphy's, it took time. I really had to build trust and respect. And I was really pleasantly pleased to see how over time I got a huge amount of support at all levels across the business during my tenure.
Interesting that suppliers responded. And one of the things we talk about in the pod is the changing world of sales and how with more diversity, more females have come into the career. But I love the fact that your move was a bit of a catalyst.
Yeah, I thought it was great at the time. Really good.
And I really like that. And now you went back to retail or into Dan's for particular reasons, experiences you wanted to gather. Explain a bit about what the career logic behind the move, and did you get what you were looking for?
Yeah, so firstly, Dan's are based in Melbourne and I was in Sydney at the time. Our move from Sydney to Melbourne was for a personal one, and I really didn't want to put my career on hold. I'd worked with Dan's actually when I was at Asda. We did a cross-market collaboration about 7 years prior, so I knew the brand well, let alone the experience that I had when I was at Diageo. What I would say, though, is that the move worked for both Dan's and I at the time. So I was really looking to build a bigger commercial scope for my experience. I have a North Star of being a general manager or a managing director, and I knew that based on my background, I needed to do a much bigger commercial role to then make it to a sales director, to then have the potential to get to an MD level. And at the time, Dan's were looking for a very different head of merchandise for beer. And I think that where I'm really pleased is it's now set a legacy. We've had far more female head of beers from what I can see since I left the business.
So a legacy at the time, or a changing of the guard at the time, which has kind of left some impact as well. Brilliant. Fantastic. Let's talk about change. 18 months later, having gone to Dan's and did what you did and survived and thrived in that environment, you made another big move. And there's a lot of new in this one. It's a non-linear move, new category, another new country, another new function, to lead the transformation from a distributor model to an in-country model in New Zealand for Dyson. So how did that happen with so much new involved?
When you put it like that, there was a lot happening at the time. One of the things that I love is taking risks and calculated risks. So yes, it sounds a lot, but actually, if I break it right down in terms of what happened, I was looking to move back to Sydney from Melbourne at the time. And I reached out to my network, and I'd actually worked with the sales director of Dyson previously when she was at Diageo. And she was looking for someone that could come in for a period of time, really wrap their arms around the New Zealand business, really bring a voice back into the ANZ business, but more importantly, get the market of New Zealand back to where it needed to be, both from a performance point of view, from a team engagement point of view, and really set the market up for success before a permanent country manager came into role. So yes, it was challenging, but I think based on my background and experience, because I was known in terms of what I'd previously achieved, it made it quite a straightforward move for Dyson to put me into that role.
You say that, but as a recruiter, often the briefs I get are a little bit more straightforward. So, and I'm interested from our listeners' point of view, from a career point of view, they often think in quite straight lines, so I'm in this category, I'm in this function, that's my future. Now, you change it all up there, so I'm not so sure it's straightforward. So, if you're someone kind of looking for for the next step, then you often you look for a natural progression. That's a lot of change. So, was it very deliberate by you to kind of change it all up? And again, from a Dyson point of view, they must have seen something in you that's because you're not from the category. You didn't know New Zealand. You hadn't led a sales function before. So there was a lot in that.
There was, but I think it shows the importance of using your network when you're looking for a big change. I think the other thing is I was in an interim country manager position, not necessarily a sales director role at the time. So on that basis, they were looking for breadth of leadership, someone that could take a broader perspective and someone that was able to really juggle bringing teams together to be able to deliver. And I think that has been pretty consistent around my background, even since my Asda days.
So how did it go?
Honestly, the travel was pretty challenging. So, my personal brief was that I wanted to get back to Sydney, and the role was semi-based out of Sydney, semi-based out of Auckland. So I still remember the Sunday evenings in the airport on my way to Auckland, travelling the evening to then be in the office on a Monday. But it went really, really well. I struggled initially to connect with the fact that I had to learn brand new brands, learn an industry, really learn the team, but also understand the stakeholders within the business that I needed to really work closely with to be able to set the team up for success. That said, the mandate was around really getting the team to feel valued and drive greater transparency of what was happening so that then the ANZ business could really wrap their arms around the market and make sure that they were set up for support. So all in all, I'm really proud with what we achieved, and I think it was a really solid handover for the permanent country manager at the time.
Yeah, brilliant. And it kind of, I guess, paved the way for you to do more things at Dyson, which we'll get into. So you then, I guess, were full-time back in Sydney once you got New Zealand up and running and handed it over. So you must have clocked up some real air miles but at the time. But so you came back, the head of sales role for retail at Dyson, which is about, 70% of their business at the time?
Yeah, that's right.
Pretty big part of it. And then reasonably swiftly, you stepped then up to the ELT, 6 months or so later as the sales director, leading a team of 185, 6 channels across customer, field, L&D, sales planning, shopper marketing. That's a big step again, Katie. Did you feel ready? How did that happen?
Do we ever feel 100% ready for a role, Mike? I think throughout my career, whilst I've been really successful, I have faced times where I get massive imposter syndrome. But I've always taken the approach that if you wait to be 100% ready for a role, you never progress, you never step forward, and you will constantly stay within your comfort zone. So what I did learn, though, is the importance of building a really clear 90-day plan. You need to really get an understanding of what your priorities are, create space to build the right relationships. So at the time, I was building relationships with my new MD at the time, with the leadership team. I was building a sales leadership team. But what that really helped me understand is where my role needed to lean in and support my team, but also where I could take a step back and really understand what was working and what wasn't so that we could get to a clear plan to deliver the year.
Imposter syndrome is a really interesting concept. I think it cripples a lot of people who don't make decisions or put themselves out there because they haven't got the confidence or they don't back themselves. How do you work through that?
Look, it's taken time and, every now and then I'll still be faced with that as a challenge. What I've learned to do is really feel grateful for the opportunities and I'm very kind of forward looking in terms of my career and what's next. I think it's important that you slow down and just recognize and take stock of all the things that you've achieved, really take feedback from your team around why they see you as a strong leader. But I think for anyone more junior learning their career out there, just kind of fake it till you make it. And you find that naturally drives confidence around how you show up and what you do. But also, what's the worst that could possibly happen?
Yeah. There's an assumption, I think, by many that you're the one who's the imposter, you're the one who's feeling this way. Everybody else is confident and smashing it. It's not the case.
No.
Everyone's faking it. To
a certain degree, yeah. But that also means we've always got more to learn as we're growing as well, regardless of the level that you're at.
I agree. I think as soon as you believe you're not faking it, you're probably too comfortable. Actually,
I agree.
And having that little edge is, whilst it's if you let it be, it can be crippling. But actually, that good level of stress is not a bad thing. It shows you're on the edge a bit more. But cool.
I agree.
So, complex roles you talked about, lots of moving parts there. You had a clear mandate when you were in New Zealand to set up the business. Was it as clear in that role with so much going on?
So yes and no. At the time, I worked with an incredibly strong MD, and his brief to me and his guidance to me was, I don't know if I can say this, but don't stuff it up. Yes, we were a huge part of the business, had a huge amount that we needed to achieve. The other thing is the ANZ business had consistently delivered its budget results year in, year out. And I think that meant as a team, we're extremely proud around what we needed to achieve, but it put a little bit more pressure on things. So don't stuff it up was kind of twofold. One was around the performance and the fact that we needed to deliver the numbers and find a way. But the second was also the need to build a really strong team around me to make sure that we were successful.
Great. And we're going to jump into the kind of specifics of your role there in more detail in a second. But just finishing off in the career conversation, Katie. Now, you recently made a decision to leave Dyson. Did you feel you had a lot left to do there? Was it quite a natural kind of point to go?
I'll always look back on my time at Dyson fondly. We achieved so much together as a team. You know, the leadership team that I worked with at the time were one of the strongest that I've operated with. And I'm really proud of some of the big achievements that we made. Navigating COVID as a new sales director was terrifying and exciting at the same time. But I put the success down to how I built the team and what they were able to deliver. But no, I feel like I've set them up for success for the next couple of years and they've got what they need to keep delivering the plan.
Great. So what's your legacy? What's your biggest achievement when you look back on Dyson?
If I speak to the team members that I'm still in touch with, I think for many of the females in the business, they've really respected the fact that I was a strong female and was very vocal on the LT. I always brought up the challenges, talked about the things that were really on our team's mind, and that made a meaningful difference in terms of how we could move the business forward.
You talked a second ago, Katie, about your North Star being general manager, running a business. When you look forward in terms of what's next for you on that journey, where will we see Katie Steele pop up next?
Good question. So in the very short term, I'm actually looking to upskill myself in areas that I don't know a lot about. So the first, and you might laugh at this, but I'm learning about the world of AI. I think it's something that's going to play a much bigger part in business over the next couple of years. And it's something that I haven't had a huge amount of exposure to in my career. The second is I'm also doing the Australian Institute of Company Directors course. That's really, really important as I look to take much bigger leadership roles and understand the role that a board play. Very much looking forward to my next sales director role and doing a number of rotations to really continue to build on my commercial acumen and drive more operational understanding around how we can get a business to truly succeed. But yeah, as you said, longer term, my North Star continues to be a general manager and an MD. And that's very much because I love facing into challenges that businesses have. I really enjoy bringing teams together to deliver. And I think there's just so much more that I can offer companies in the future.
Okay, excellent. Look forward to seeing that path continue. AI is interesting though, isn't it? We in recruitment, we talk a lot about this, ChatGPT, what it's doing to our world. I know there's a lot more to AI than ChatGPT, but it's of the moment.
Definitely, yeah.
And, how's it going to disrupt? And every week I see people having a lot of fun with it, writing job ads in the style of, Donald Trump or whatever. And it's quite fun. It's amazing where it's going to go. Now, I mentioned before, guys, that we're going to get into Katie's role in more depth. I think Katie's listened to the pod and one of the comments she made was we don't get that granular enough sometimes in actually what goes on at a sales director level. And Katie's held a very senior role with a lot of moving parts, big complexity. So I want to just dive into it in more depth and unpick what that role actually is. So for those of you who are inspired by this conversation and others, do you think, actually, is that a role I want to do? And if I do, how do I get ready for it? How do I prep for that role? So if we kind of look at that role in Dyson, let's start with the measurables. So what are the KPIs that you're working to as a sales director?
Good question. So I think first and foremost, because the sales director role sits on the leadership team, the first KPI will always be around overall business delivery. So part of that is the leadership team as part of business planning will come together and create a plan on a page, which will have some pretty tangible outcomes set out in terms of what needs to be achieved for the year ahead. That's also a really good way for the MD at the time to bring the leadership team together to get focused on the priorities. So first and foremost will always be around overall business delivery. The second is then around the functional delivery of a sales director. And that's split into two separate sections. The first is around actually delivery of the plan through performance. So for Dyson, as an example, the biggest priorities there were around gross margin and also market share. So you have some really clear, measurable outcomes that need to be achieved by the end of the year. But underpinning that needs to be some clear initiatives that you've built around what's going to actually help deliver against that performance ambition. So I'd say that based on my experience, they're the top two that you should always see on a sales director KPI. However, I've always built in 2 additional goals into my roles, which has really helped set me up for success. The first is around how you build a plan that means that you're future fit. And that very much talks into either future trading or distribution strategies through to any cost-saving initiatives or future operating model designs to make sure that you're always 1 to 2 steps ahead of the year that you're actually operating in. And then the second one, because it's always been very important to me, is around team engagement. So having really clear KPIs that can be measured around what team engagement and retention looks like for your area is also critical, especially for an area like sales, based on what we're also seeing change in the industry at the moment with the level of burnout.
So you think first and foremost, as a sales director, of what's the business objective? What are we trying to achieve at a corporate level? And then functionally, how do you deliver that? How does your function deliver against that business goal? Then you have a lot running alongside that. That's great, but actually we have to have one eye to the future, whether it's AI or whatever that happens to be, but to new channels, new customers, how do we continue to grow? And how are you connecting your team meaningfully from an engagement point of view to that as well?
That's right.
Nice wrap up. That's great. Love it. Okay, so that's the role of a sales director. And if you're looking for a takeaway, guys, just remember that. There's a lot more to it. That's a really nice summary, I think. How do you balance the functional responsibilities you have, though, with this role in the ELT? Because the ELT is running the business. Do you see much tension between the two?
Yes, and I think that you do need tension between the two, and that's tension with how you balance your functional responsibility with the role that you play on the leadership team, but it's also having healthy tension with the other functional leads that sit on the leadership team in terms of how you drive the business forward. For me, the level of tension that you get will very much vary depending on the members that sit on the leadership team. If ego exists, you might not be able to always get to the right outcomes. So my experience in the early days at Dyson, when I first joined the LT, is that we always aligned behind the principle that you take a business first mindset and a function decision second. What that meant is that you're able to make the right decisions on behalf of the business, and whilst that might impact your function, because you were part of making the right decision, you could then filter that through effectively through the team at a communication level. I think the other point to note is we spend years and years building towards making it onto a leadership team. And I think we can sometimes forget the role that we should play to help drive culture. You know, what is it that makes the business that you're working for truly unique? What are the things that we need to champion as the functional leaders to make sure that we're really driving the business forward? But you can also have fun with that. So, for example, my experience at Dyson is that we had a D&I culture. And part of that, you got to choose as an LT certain areas that you wanted to sponsor, and things like mental health and well-being, especially given that we've been through COVID and we're still going through, you know, what happens next after COVID, was really important to me. But you can have fun with that. You can really have a huge impact around bringing mental health and well-being to the broader business based on the role that you play on the LT. So yeah, you know, you have some tough business conversations around, as an LT, facing into the challenges, making big business decisions, but you also get to have a bit of fun around what really matters to you and what you want to bring as a leader on the LT as well.
Yeah, if you choose to do that, right? Some people might not, but I think it's a great opportunity. It's a good lesson there around the difference between thinking functionally and thinking more broadly. Often people think my team is the people who work for me. That's a team you lead. Your team is actually your peer set, and your peer set is a team that you're responsible for. So whatever level you're at in a business, I think it's a big shift junior to mid to senior managers have to make, which is their level of responsibility. Their team is how they execute and how they engage and how they perform, but actually they're accountable to their peers and to ensure that they're operating and thinking about whatever that peer set happens to be, whether it's a sales leadership team or an executive leadership team, and that's a very nice way to think of it and look at it. But, so you don't sit there and just defend your function all day long.
I agree.
You're that's not your team.
No.
Yeah. Cool. What does it take to be successful as a sales director, do you think?
So this is a pretty big question. First and foremost, you need to be commercially astute. If you're not, I think you should probably question why you want to become a sales director. You also need to be really decisive. If you think about it, every single day you're making a magnitude of decisions, and you've got to move quickly to be able to let your team move forward and be able to execute what they need to do whilst giving them a freedom to succeed. I also think there's a big part around a sales director is responsible generally for a number of functions. So they've really got to bring those teams together to be able to align against the priorities, align against a plan, so that then you can actually deliver the results that you need to do. The other part is around relationships, and you have to really love building relationships both externally and internally to be able to, one, bring people on the journey, but probably more importantly, influence the agenda and make sure that you're getting the right outcome for the business that you're working for. More important, and I've heard this on a lot of the podcasts as I listened to them, is this concept of breadth. And I think to be a really good sales director, companies are looking for someone that hasn't just moved from being a sales exec all the way up to a sales director. They really need to see breadth, because then you can take a broader business perspective and really leverage that knowledge to bring something different to the role.
Great summary. And guys, if you are thinking about what does breadth look like, then check out Katie's profile on LinkedIn. That's breadth. That's a tremendously well-managed career to this point. So now, I've interviewed a lot of female sales directors and female leaders in this podcast, Katie, probably disproportionately compared to the reality of the market. So whilst I've probably represented a 50-50 gender split, I don't think that's actually the case. I've had to work reasonably hard to get 50-50. Why isn't sales 50-50? Look, there's a lot on Google if you search why is there not a 50-50 gender mix in sales. From my experience, I think there's still a huge perception based on the legacy of sales being a boys' club. I think it's changing. But I think the reality is that you still get a huge over-index in males within the function. And whether we like it or not, there's still a stereotype that women struggle to be able to deliver strong performance results. I think that there's far more stories, positive stories around the role that females are empowering sales functions to reach their full potential, really driving towards high performance culture, which is ultimately the end goal of what you want to try and get to as a sales director. So based on having more role models as sales directors, I think that we can only see an improvement around the overall gender mix. But in my opinion, gender mix is changing, but it's still far too slow within that function. And why is it so slow, do you think? I think that in sales, you're constantly balancing delivering in the here and now with having a longer term plan. And I think if you look, if you kind of go back 5 years, some companies just wanted to deliver the results. And actually, based on that, it's far easier for a company to just move into the role someone that has previously delivered that. So when you don't have huge representation of females previously doing that, you will get an unconscious bias towards that. But I think that if you take gender off the table,
we still need to be able to break through the barriers of what's holding females back from actually succeeding and going up in the ranks to become really successful female sales directors.
What do businesses have to do? What do CEOs have to do, HR directors, recruiters like me? What do we have to do in order to break that barrier?
I think we've got to, even if you take gender off the table, again, we have to break down the barriers and create a conversation. Like, gender shouldn't these days be a blocker for anyone to succeed within the role. So we need to find a way to support flexibility in the workplace. We're starting to see more mentorships and development plans put in place that will help. But we ultimately need to make sure that roles and opportunities are available for anybody to apply. But by having a more diverse workforce and supporting the right person into the role, regardless of the background, we should naturally see an improvement in females within the function versus just hitting a mixed target. I think when you find that companies are being asked to hit a gender mixed target, they move very quickly and may not necessarily put the right person into those roles.
Which doesn't really help.
It doesn't, no.
To your first point, which is the success or the reality of the day predicates the future. So if you've got somebody's in a role and not performing, that doesn't help the future. It just ingrains the attitude that that person or that gender isn't right for the role, which is crazy. I think it's changing. I think it's getting better. I say I've worked hard to kind of create 50-50 representation on the pod from a female-male point of view in sales. But it's not possible. There are a lot of great female leaders who've been on this podcast and still to come, which I think tells me that the role of sales is changing and the role females play, therefore, is genuinely more impactful. And one, what's your view on that? And secondly, is it a case of, in some cases, that, a female will be a better sales leader, depending on the business circumstances, what the business is trying to do, than a male?
Agree. And I think, what you've done with the podcast is amazing because you've given so many different leaders, regardless of the background, the opportunity to share their stories, which is helping the broader audience understand just how much opportunity there is out there to be successful in whatever career you want to put your mind to. If I look at, if I take my own experience within, the last 6 years of my career, the experience that I have had is based on who I am. I'm able to really listen, empathize, and understand before really jumping into a fix and solution. And I think that that's really helped me position myself in a way to take on certain business mandates. I think as well, businesses are now far more focused around driving really strong performing teams. And this isn't around is a male better or a female better. I think, though, that females are able to cut through far more based on sometimes the different approach that they can bring to roles.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Katie. I think it's really interesting to see what the future looks like. So I think sales will continue to evolve. When you look to the future, do you see a function that will continue to change?
Definitely. I mean, every function in every business will continue to change. Change is the constant in our world. If I think about the big areas that I think are likely to change and evolve from a sales point of view, the first is around we've got to find a simpler way to do business internally and externally. So whether that's process improvement to really drive efficiency or, how we operate to become more effective, that will be really important. The second, in terms of how I think sales will change, is around we have to build more strategic, longer-term relationships with retailers. And we need to do that through problem solving and joint objectives so that you can achieve both a retailer and a supplier's performance outcomes. The third, and this is specifically for field teams, I think that we need to find a way to get technology to really drive greater visibility and insights. I'm a firm believer that a field team within a sales organization is critical to really help feed data, insights, and, that team are on the ground learning every day around what's happening and what's changing. They're actually the filter through to many sales organizations around where there's opportunities. But if I wrap all of that up, sales will continuously be under cost pressure. If you think about investment choices that need to be made, a sales team might always think that marketing are the big spenders. But if you look at the level of investment choices around terms, around co-op, around rebates, actually it's sales that are the big spenders. So I think how we spend and where we invest will continue to be scrutinized, because ultimately every business is looking to drive more sustainable growth.
In a previous episode coming out soon, I talked with Claire Waite Abella. One of the things she discussed was how data will drive that as well.
Definitely.
And coming up, guys, on the pod, I've got Paul Bull, who's well known to most of you from the Real World Marketing consulting firm. He's now in a company called Real World Analytics. And we're going to explore revenue management in some depth as perhaps the new vanguard of FMCG and retail. It's a really interesting topic, so we'll get into that in more detail. I want to finish off, Katie, just talking a bit more about your career and summing up advice that you would give others who are inspired by this conversation. Before I do ask for your advice, where do you get your own career advice from? Who advises you?
So I've always made a big effort to build strong relationships with my line manager. So first and foremost, have always had really good career advice from my line managers. I also really enjoy listening to podcasts, and really, if there's certain topics that I want to try and unpack, podcasts are a really nice way for me to learn and understand more. The other thing, though, is I also check in with career coaches every couple of years. And that's a really good way for someone who doesn't know you very well to just ask all the difficult, challenging questions around where you are and where you want to be in the future, and really make sure that you're moving in the right direction.
So you get good objectivity from that person who's not invested in your career. They're just going to give you good advice.
Yeah.
That's
cool.
Right. Any particular pieces of advice you've had that you think, that really helped me?
Yes. So there's two that have had what I call a big impact on my career and how I've been able to make some of the choices that I have. The first was when I was working at Asda, and I was agonizing over a decision between, do I wait and get promoted in the function that I was in, or do I take a lateral move and move from the world of commercial into marketing? And I remember my trading director at the time just laughed at me, and he said, look, we're going to be working until we're 65. You take the pressure off yourself. Just enjoy. What's the worst that can happen? As long as you're stepping forward, it doesn't matter if you take a wrong turn. No choice is a wrong one. Just learn from it and enjoy it. The second one was from one of my line managers at Diageo, and they always spoke really clearly around, technically, there is actually nothing that you can't do if you put your mind to it. There's really good ways to learn any technical skills in terms of what you need to do to be successful. The only thing, though, that is likely to hold you back when you get to more senior roles is the knowledge that you have about yourself. So really invest in getting to know yourself really well, understand your strengths, understand what you bring, because then you can bring your authentic self to any role that you actually do in the future. And I think that has stood me in really, really good stead for leading much bigger teams in my future career.
Great advice. One of the biggest things we talk about when we're running an executive interview, in fact, any interview really, is actually that level of self-awareness. It's more important than the technical side. It's more important than anything else in the interview. Is actually, do you know yourself? How do you know yourself? How do you know how you impact on others? And what's your growth journey like?
Definitely.
It's a really, and it's amazing how many people in the more junior stages of their career don't know themselves at all.
That's right.
Yeah. But anyway,
or they're not ready to know themselves.
Not prepared to reveal. Yeah, exactly. Okay. And summing up, I mean, we've given out, I think, a lot of really good points today, but if we could sum up on, 3 pieces of advice that you would leave future leaders with, Katie, what would they be? And would that differ if you were talking to a male or a female audience?
Okay, good question. So I think the first couple, so the first one, I actually echo some of the advice that Oliver Tatlow gave a couple of years ago, which is around, to be really successful in your career, you need to do the best possible job in the one you're in right now. So continuously strive to be rated as high performing or high achiever in the role that you're doing. And that will naturally get you a bigger seat at the table in terms of conversations on future opportunities. The second is around, remember that you work with humans and it's in your business's best interest for you to be successful. So make sure that you're building a development plan that isn't just a tick box exercise, but that really matters to you and that you believe in. What that will naturally do is get buy-in with your line manager and whoever else you want to share it with to make sure that you're getting as much support as possible to succeed. And then the last one is if you're presented with an opportunity and you're not 100% sure on whether or not it's the right one, just step forward. You can't make a bad decision. And if you don't think you can do it, say yes and work out the rest later. I've always taken the view that, if it doesn't make you feel uncomfortable, if it doesn't excite you or you aren't learning something new, then you've really got to question yourself whether or not you're in your comfort zone and if that's the right zone to be in. So those three areas are absolutely generic. Based on my experience and my observations, particularly within more junior female sales talent, it's use your voice. Remember you have a voice. And I often see that females, when they're in their younger careers, will generally not put their voice forward in meetings, and they really miss an opportunity to be able to share their point of view and influence their agenda. I think you've got to remember that your voice is as important as anyone's in that room.
Powerful advice. Absolutely love it. Oliver Tatlow, guys, if you haven't heard the episode number 39, I've just looked it up. So jump back on. It's really worth a listen. But Katie, that's been superb. Absolutely loved the conversation. Thanks for sharing. And there's some incredible pieces of insight and advice that we've uncovered today.
Thanks, Mike.
And thanks to you for listening. Next on the pod is Tyler Martin, CEO and founder of Yes You Can Drinks. Yes You Can is a very cool zero-alcohol cocktail startup. And he's going to talk about his journey from Olympian to entrepreneur. So lots to talk about with Tyler. Now, meanwhile, if listening to Katie's inspired you to address your career goals or you'd like input on talent planning for your team, then reach out to me or my team at AXR Recruitment and Search, as well as specialists in sales, marketing, and category recruitment. We have everything you need to help. Salary guides, interview guides, market guides, guides on how to scale up your business. Now, who else would you talk to, I would say, but then I am biased. So, Katie, thanks again. That was brilliant. And from me, Mike Dixon, keep listening to our pod to help your future in sales and marketing. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast from AXR Recruitment and Search. We're passionate about helping you get the most out of your sales and marketing career. Keep listening as we bring you more career insights and advice from Australia's top sales and marketing leaders. You just can't get this career advice anywhere else. My name is Mike Dixon. See you next time on Your Future in Sales and Marketing.